How are we this morning? So, my presentation is called Credentialing Lived Experience, the Peer Support Practice. And I'm here to talk about how valuable lived experience has become for our agency in Riverside County. Before I do, I want to talk about me. This is me. Hi, I'm Shannon. And I want you to know me a little bit because I'm a peer specialist. I became a peer specialist 11 years ago, and a lot of people don't believe in accidents, but it was just this incredible accident that happened. And so I just want to share a little bit about myself. So I'm a wife, and that's my lobster, my husband Eric in that picture there. I'm a daughter. That's my dad. No, that's not William H. Macy from Shameless, but he does behave that way. That's my mother. That's Gloria. I'm a daughter to those two. Then those are my kids, my beautiful children, Devin on the top, and that was Andy on the bottom. And in the last 4 years, I discovered my Andy is now Amber. So she is in the process of transitioning, and I'm a proud trans mom and a mama bear. That's my brother Patrick. My brother Patrick was in a car accident when I was 17. He was 22, and he was left paralyzed from the chest down and lived with quadriplegia for 22 years and died at the age of 44. That's my dog Fred. I'm a fur mom. That's Fred, and that's Bailey. I'm a fur mom to that kitty cat too. I'm the best friend of someone with MS who lives in a hospital full-time and has been for the last 6 years of his life. I'm born and bred at the ocean. I was born in Santa Barbara County and have not lived any further than 60 miles from the ocean my entire life. I've been an actress for over 40 years, performed in probably over 100 productions, and been a lead performer in 41 of them. I'm also a costume designer. That's Andorra from Bewitched. I'm a big fan of the mid-century period. And I'm a cosplayer and a makeup artist. I'm obsessed with the Wienermobile. I don't know if you've ever seen the Oscar Mayer Wienermobile, but if I see it, I run screaming, saying, I need my picture with the mobile. It hasn't happened yet. It's on the bucket list. I'm a fanatic for Broadway musicals. I went to school to be a Broadway performer, and people thought I was delusional because I thought I could be a star on the Broadway stage, but I still believe that, and that is not a delusion. I absolutely smile every time I see a Volkswagen bus. I don't care what condition it's in, it just makes me smile. Linda Carter as Wonder Woman was my role model. 1976, 8-year-old girl. She was everything to me. And I believe that Judy Garland is God. I also think that I'm going to be the next CHOP champion. So that's me in a nutshell. So let's talk about lived experience. I talk to you about who I am and what I'm made of because those are the things that define me. But my mental illness, I refuse to allow it to define me. I wasn't diagnosed until I was about 20. I was in college, under pressure, in school, performing all the time, rehearsing parts for different people and different characters, and I lost sight of who I was. And I woke up one morning, I didn't know who I was. And I had a breakdown. And during that time, I struggled to finish school. I told my dad I wanted to take a year off. And he said, absolutely not, because if you don't, you're not going to come back. So pull up your bootstraps and get back to school. And I did, and I finished, which I'm very proud of. But at the same time, I didn't fully recognize what was going on inside of me at the time until later in life. I was married and divorced by the time I was 24, and I was terribly, dreadfully mentally ill. And in the journey of trying to discover who I am, I started going to therapy, and I had CBT. I had dealt with some other ways of approaching my mental health, tried some medications and some other things. And had kids, and I got married again and had kids, and went and decided I was going to be a school teacher, got my credential, and started teaching school at the middle school. And you know how middle schoolers are. They sort of suck the life right out of you, day by day by day by day. And I was having a really rough time. And I would go out to the parking lot after school and put my head on the steering wheel and cry. And I'd go home and I'd have to put on a brave face because I had 2 little kids at home who were counting on me. And my sister-in-law, who is a district attorney in Riverside, said, you know, why don't you look at the website, county website, and see if there's a job that you could have where you could push paper around for a while, help some people out, because you have such a good heart. Why don't you do that? And I said, you know, I'll do that. So I went to the website, and there's this ad for this job called peer support specialist. And I didn't know what it was, but it asked a bunch of questions about having adverse childhood experiences. Do you come from a broken home? Yeah. My parents split up when I was just a toddler. Was there some dependency issues in the household? Yeah, there was. And I could check off a whole bunch of boxes on this ad and said, you know what, I want to go talk to these people about doing this job. So I went into the interview and they asked me, what makes you uniquely qualified to do this work? And I started talking about my experiences with my family, my upbringing, my brothers and my sister and my parents, but I didn't talk about me at all. I didn't tell my story. No way. Didn't talk about my stuff. And they picked me for the job, and they said, where do you want to be in 5 years? And the manager who had the job that I currently have now, I looked her straight in the face and said, I'm going to have your job. And she went, okay. And I said, all right. And they gave me the job, and I was very excited. Something new, something that had benefits. It started with benefits. That was very exciting. And so they said, well, we're going to send you to a class called peer employment training. And I said, okay, great. They're going to teach me how to be with other people. Awesome. I'm smart enough. I've got this going on. I'm sure I can do this work. They sent me to this class, and I freaked out. I'm in a room with a whole bunch of people who are talking about their mental illness in front of each other and out in the open. And we're being tasked to tell their lived experience to one another in an open forum. And I thought, I don't know if I can do this. I was so self-stigmatized about what was going on inside of me and what had been going on for years. I was terrified to tell that story. But I did it. And I went to work, and I started working at a little clinic in Banning, California. It's about 50 miles west of Palm Springs, and it sounds cool, but it's not. It's hot and it's windy, very windy and very hot, and a lot of poverty. It's a rough place, but it's a great place to provide support to other people who need it. So I went to work in this clinic, and within just a couple of months of being in the clinic, I felt out of place and ill-prepared for what I was facing as a public mental health servant. I needed to know how to document for those services. I needed to know more, and I didn't, and there was nothing in place to prepare me for what that service was. And in that moment, my educational mind comes to play and says, training, 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 and I started writing. Every night after work, I went home and I just started writing training curricula, one after the other, about the things I was learning about how I partnered with a psychiatrist, how I partnered with my on-site mentor who was a CT, who was in her supervision time at the time. She'd just finished her master's. And during that partnership, I learned that we needed to make sure that peer providers got every single opportunity to learn what it's like to work in a public mental health system. So what is a peer support specialist? You all know what that is. But if I was just going to say what it is, it's a person with lived experience. It's people who live in wellness and recovery. It's people who can model wellness for others, people who share their lived experience in a meaningful way and not just in an arbitrary way. People who have trained in the practice of peer support. And I say that very intentionally. Peer support is a practice. It is not just a warm body. It's not just a person showing up that says, yes, I have a mental illness and I can help someone else. They are taught how to utilize that lived experience and to be able to have conversations with individuals where they listen more and they speak less, and they don't have to have the clinical boundaries that many other practitioners have. I think that when you are trained in peer support to utilize it as it is intended, you're credentialed. Riverside County follows the SAMHSA guidelines for peer support. I'm going to read them to you. It's small here, so forgive me while I try. That peer provision is supposed to be recovery-oriented. Peer workers hold out hope to those who they serve, partnering with them to envision and achieve a meaningful and purposeful life. Peer workers help those they serve identify and build on strengths and empower them to choose for themselves, recognizing that there are multiple pathways to recovery. That's the first one. The next is person-centered. Peer recovery support services are always directed by the person participating in services. Peer recovery support is personalized to align with the specific hopes, goals, and preferences of the individual served and to respond to specific needs the individual has identified to the peer worker. It's voluntary. Peer workers are partners or consultants to those they serve. They do not dictate the types of services provided or the elements of recovery plans that will guide their work with peers. Participation in peer recovery support services is always contingent on a person's choice. Relationship focused. The relationship between the peer worker and the peer is the foundation on which peer recovery support services and support are provided. The relationship between the peer worker and the peer is respectful, trusting, empathetic, collaborative, and mutual. And lastly, it's trauma-informed. Peer recovery support utilizes a strengths-based framework that emphasizes physical, psychological, and emotional safety and creates opportunities for survivors to rebuild a sense of control and empowerment. How many peer workers do you know actually live by that standard or provide service by that standard? I think that that's something that is missed often in peer workers because peer support becomes watered down. In California, in Riverside specifically, our history in peer support was started by the California Mental Health Services Act of 2004. In 2004, there was a law that was passed by Proposition 63 that required millionaires to be taxed by 1%, and that money went into specialty mental health services. Peer support is considered a specialty mental health service. So when I say that I have roughly 140 peer providers that are all consumer identified, well, you say, well, how do you pay for it? That's how I pay for it. Early peer support was, for us in Riverside, started with parent partnerships and family advocates. The family partner, the parent partner is the person who has a minor child that was raised in the behavioral health service system, and the family advocate is a person that has a family member, a partner, a husband, a wife, a sister, a brother that's in the adult service system. And they've been around since 1998. We've already had them on staff for years. Consumer peer support didn't start until 2006, and it was met with a great deal of resistance, of course, because of the stigma of bringing someone on who self-identifies with a mental illness. So we acted on the law, and we had champions in our service system that helped us to establish a job description, an HR process on hiring peer providers, and then a contract service provision in the community that did regular peer employment training courses for us. The company we use is Recovery Innovations, or RI International, if you've heard of them. Some of you may have. So some of the things that we've learned. In the old days, 2006, I say the old days, that's funny. We were having trouble hiring for wellness. People were getting hired because they were self-disclosing for a diagnosis, but not necessarily living a life of recovery, of self-directed care for themselves at home and at work. So we recognized that we were recruiting in a way that wasn't asking the right questions. We also recognized that specific lived experience when we place people is very helpful. If you have people with justice involvement, you probably want to put them in justice-involved service systems. Like we have some that are for forensic peer support we provide in our forensic services full-service partnerships. We also wanted to create other avenues for peers to try it on for size. Volunteerism as a peer support specialist is an option, and we have hundreds of volunteer positions available in our service system. But we also have an internship, so you can try that on for side. But I'll talk about more of that in the next session. We also learned we needed to manualize the training that we had on site. So it wasn't just what you got in peer employment training and what you gathered at your work site, but there had to be a manual about what trainings in our behavioral health system peer support specialists really needed to attend. They needed to understand what co-occurring disorders were and to understand what psychopharmacology really means. There are some things that peers are often protected from in our service system. Oh, well, we don't want to send the peer to that class because that's for our social workers, or that's for our psychiatrists to get more information. Well, we send the peers to those classes as well. And in the manuals, there are benchmarks that each person meets. So by the time they pass their probation, they are ready to be promoted from trainee to journey level. Train the supervisors. This is funny. Because when I started in our service system, my supervisor, I was their very first peer in that clinic. And the supervisor didn't know, she was very well informed about what peer workers were going to be. And so she was really caring and very actively involved in my development as an employee. But the system itself was not prepared for people to come into the clinics, self-identify, and sit with a person because they didn't know, are you going to get triggered by this person? Are you okay to be in a crisis? We don't know what to do with you. Should you be co-facilitating groups? They didn't know. So I thought, well, you got to train the supervisors. So I've created a training program for supervisors in my 11 years at this. And then to frame this service as a practice, each practice in a clinic or on a treatment team is very specific. The nurse has their role and their indoctrinated practice that they've learned. The physician learns a stack of books of terminology that I couldn't even think of in their 20 years of school that they go to. Peer support specialists have their own indoctrination. That indoctrination is learning how to not label individuals and how to speak from a hopeful place, to be strengths focused at all times, and that's tricky sometimes. And a great deal of role play has to go into that practice. So it's important to have that kind of framework. So let's talk about youth. So what did we learn about transitional aged youth when we're talking about peer providers? Training has to be centered on the audience, no one size fits all. Over the years, we were using the same contract service provider to provide peer employment training, and it was an adult course. It was focused on adults. And it was the universal language of peer support. Hope, choice, environment, empowerment, spirituality, focus on these values, and then learn to be a listener and learn to validate, learn to connect, learn to build resiliency with someone, learn to roll with resistance. All these things we learned. But what we found was when you've got somebody who's 19 years old in a room full of women my age who are talking about all the life experience we've had, the marriages that have failed, the children that we have lost to drugs and alcohol. You got a 19-year-old going, what in the heck am I doing here? So what we needed to do is we needed to prepare our TAE providers with a language that they understand and to teach from a space that they're learning in this digital age. We had to also recognize the brain development of young people, the way they take on new information, and that those pathways are not quite complete. And the folks that we're training are people that we've seen in our service system, and we see something in them and say, we think you might be good at this. Would you like to try? And if this TAE provider decides they want to provide peer support, we provide that space for them, but we have to make sure that the training matches that brain developmental stage. Training environment needs to be youthful. Classrooms, conference centers like this, not so much. And I see that when I went to the Orygen Center, all the beanbag chairs everywhere was so inspiring to me because that's what we do. We bring beanbag chairs into this learning environment so you can slouch and learn at the same time. I'm okay with that. Training must prepare the youth for the job placement because what we're training people for is for a job. And it's not just a job, it's a career path. In Riverside, we've created a career path, but we have to make sure that that young person is prepared for that career path. and prepared for maybe setbacks, and understanding that in that job placement, is there a partnership with the person who is placing that individual and the person who runs that location, who supervises that location, and that everybody is each person is kind of grouped in a collaboration and everybody's on the same page. And one of the other things that we learned about the TAE learning environment is that there is no such thing as a wrong answer. If you are training young people to become peer providers, every single answer that they're willing to give you in that environment is an opportunity to explore. We found that in some of our first training courses that we did, we had a pilot for the TAE training that we had, and a couple of our facilitators struggled with, well, this is what the curricula says, and this is how we're supposed to run it, and these are the right answers for the final exam, and we want to make sure that they're all getting the right answers. Well, you know what? If they're absorbing it from a standpoint of understanding what their role is, it's okay, let's explore it. And let's not see what's wrong, but always see what's strong in what they said. Training programs. If you're going to have a training program, it has to establish core values, and it has to represent the values of your agency. We've had Recovery Innovations helping us in the community for a long time, under contract, providing 7 or 8 of these trainings a year, on an average of 25 people. So, over 200 people we graduate a year in Riverside in peer employment training. And their core values match our core values, which are to provide a hopeful space, create recovery or hopeful environments, have high expectations for people to recover, to move forward in their lives in spite of what's happening to them internally. And then have those pathways, those principles, wellness principles that help a person understand that being a peer support specialist requires that we recognize that each person has a choice to be here, that we are going to hold the hope for the person that we're seeing no matter what the circumstance. We're going to empower that person to take the lead in what they want to do. We want to be able to have the conversations that are difficult to have around spirituality, and we want to make sure that each person understands that personal responsibility is kind of the driving force to getting to the very end of a training program and being placed into a service system. Classes grouped by age. It's cool to have these classes when you have, the 15 to 18 and 19 to 25. In some circumstances, you can't do that. In our public mental health service system, we can only do 18 to 25 because of some of the rules around having adults with young people. So we're trying to work that one out, but that's something to consider. When you're training mature adults, it's kind of nice to have people over the age of 40 in the room at the same time because of that lived experience. We require in-person coursework. If you're going to come work in Riverside and you're going to come saying, I took peer employment training to be a peer support specialist in your service system, if they come to us and said, well, I took an online course about peer support, fantastic, bravo, I love it. I love that you came with that information. I'm sending you to peer employment training. Because I need you to do it in person. I need you to have role play. I need you to have that opportunity to practice what it's like to use the 7 steps of recovery coaching. And yeah, there's 7 steps. And you'll get there eventually. Even if you do them out of order, it's okay. But I need you to do it. So I'll send you to peer employment training, and I'll pay your salary to do that. Inspire youth to model lived experience. I think that's really the whole purpose, is even if a young person goes through peer employment training, they don't necessarily need to be a peer support specialist working in a service system. They're learning to be with their cohort. They're learning to be with each other, to be reflective listeners and show more empathy for the people that they care for. And then, what is the post-completion planning? If somebody completes a peer employment training course, what are we doing for them once the class is over? Well, goodbye, here's your certificate. See ya. No, we don't do that. We have what's called the Peer Opportunities Workshop. And Peer Opportunities Workshop in Riverside talks about every opportunity you can have as a peer support specialist using this new practice that you've learned. It could be volunteer opportunities in the community. It could be part-time jobs in the community in other areas. It could be an internship with Riverside County, which I'll talk about in the other talk, but we have an internship 6-month rotation, 20 hours a week, where you get a stipend and it doesn't interrupt your pension that you get if you're in disability pension. But have a completion plan. So each person has an opportunity to do something with what they've learned. So this is our training program in Riverside County. I am the proud editor of this material, so if you find typos, it's my fault. We had a team of individuals that worked together to create this training program. It was the parent partner manager that has the position just like mine in Riverside County, but as the parent partner. It was our children's services administrator, myself, a TAE peer provider, and another line staff parent partner. And we worked together to kind of pool all the resources of training that we had gathered over the years and put it into this book. And the basic things that we teach in this course are understanding the history of peer support, the consumer movement, understand what it's connected to, taking people back all the way to the 1970s and understanding where peer support came from. Teaching the indoctrination of hopeful language and understanding how to create hopeful environments. Moving from consumer to provider. What does that feel like and what does that look like in concept? Understanding your authentic self and building mutuality versus creating hierarchies between yourself and other people. We talk about professionalism. That's a concept that youth today don't have as much exposure to as we've recognized in the past. Professionalism was something that was brought about by work experience, but I'm finding with young people we have to start at the very, very beginning of what professionalism really means for someone. Emotional intelligence, having the understanding that you have to roll with your own resistance or to be able to practice mindfulness about emotional reactiveness as opposed to responsiveness, contemplation and meaningful responsiveness to situations or relational challenges that a person meets. Understanding TAE culture. That was a whole lesson for me. I mean, I have 2 millennials living at home, right? I understand the TAE culture from a personal experience as a mom, but out there in the world, there are a whole bunch of other aspects to it that I had no clue about, and I was very, very well educated in this area when we were trying to collect this data. Peer support role and supporting spirituality. What does that look like? How do you walk alongside someone who may not have had the opportunity to reintroduce themselves to their spiritual practice? And not talk about religion particularly, but how do you connect with something that's bigger than yourself? Working as part of a team in challenging situations. Peer support specialists that work in Riverside County are each part of a treatment team. They have a very specific role, and they're on every treatment team we have. Every clinic, every program, every crisis service unit, mobile service unit, peer support specialists are placed in every aspect of the work that we do in Riverside. So we try to prepare them for that. Discovery versus recovery. What is discovery? Well, when you're a young person, you really don't know what recovery is because you're just trying to figure out who you are. You know, what is this stuff that makes me tick? Understanding trauma and substance use. How do we share our lived experience? And then living a journey as a peer support specialist. So that's kind of the thumbnail of what we're doing in this training course. We had a one-year pilot, and we just re-released it under this cover here. So where do we utilize peers? I mentioned pretty much in every service system, but all the things that are listed here in our mature adult programs, adult outpatient services, youth drop-in centers, our justice-involved service systems, long-term care and crisis outreach, commercially sexually exploited youth. We have a program that was written, got a grant to do TFCBT and peers as partners during that process, which is fascinating. Integrated health centers, family room clinics, workforce trainings. We do research and technology. We have a senior peer support specialist placed in our research and technology department who has the special skills and gifts around creating data and reporting out what we're getting from our peer support services. And then we bring them to conferences just like this one to share their story of recovery. In clinics, peer support specialists, they model that evidence. I'm the evidence that recovery is possible. I'm a role model, not just for the other peers that are coming to get for services, but I'm a role model for staff. Oftentimes people experience burnout, put up barriers that don't exist. And peer support specialist perspective, that perspective of their lived experience, might be able to reorient someone through their role modeling. We support consumers to learn new ways to wellness and in groups and in one-on-one sessions. We have regular one-on-one sessions. We schedule them just like any other therapist or any other case manager. And we follow a person as long as they want us to. So it's not time limited. Peer support is peer support, and it's offered to any person who walks through our doors in Riverside, and they can have it as long as they want it. We have some billing issues that come to play if two people are going to serve the same person in a given day, but we work that out. We create and model recovery environments. The peer support specialists do the boards in the lobbies and create spaces where people want to express themselves artistically or create quiet rooms. You guys have done that here at your new site, which, it was just a feast for my eyes when I was walking around, because those are the kind of environments that we try to create as peer providers, but they give us $12 and tell you to, figure it out. And then we allow the person there to serve, the person who's being served to just take the lead. And the peer provider walks alongside them in whatever process they want to do. Do they want to learn how to balance their budget? They're going to sit alongside them. They're not going to do it for them. They're going to show them what that process looked like for them, or how they got their kids back from social services. Be able to help model what that looks like and support the parent who's lost that child in that very, very difficult time in their life. So what do clinic supervisors find most challenging? The biggest thing that I discovered we do a class called the Supervisor's Guide to Peer Support. I do the class. And I meet with supervisors, whether it's one-on-one or 4 people in the room or 10 people in the room. And out of the 41 that I could identify in our service system, I've met with 28 of them, so I'm almost there. But in this class, I ask them to tell me the things that they're struggling with regard to their peer staff. And they'll list a whole litany of things, from attendance challenges and organizational challenges, which are all coachable things. And we have senior peer support specialists that work as mentors, and I'm going to talk about that in a second, but how to better utilize that senior peer support specialist in their program. Well, one of the biggest things that they had trouble with was pathologizing their employee. They're an employee, and there are rules and laws around how you behave with your employee. So what we've discovered is that we have to have an open line of communication between myself and the supervisors need to be able to call me and tell me that they're struggling because they want to be the employee's therapist as opposed to their boss. And they don't want to be disciplinary in their action if a person is abusing, sick time or is not utilizing the right avenues through which to get support around attendance. And so those are the biggest challenges that we've had, and I'm starting to get a lot more participation from supervisors to have more conversations with me when things are going wrong. So that's interesting, and I'll bring that up a little bit, or somebody might ask me some questions about that in the next session. Wellness at work. Wellness at work is very important. I practice it every day. I use Mary Ellen Copeland's Wellness Recovery Action Plan every day of my life. I'm an advanced level facilitator. I have 8 advanced level facilitators in Riverside County, so we train our RAP facilitators on site. In Riverside County, roughly, we have 80 people that facilitate RAP. It's offered to every single person who walks through our doors, the Wellness Recovery Action Plan. So it helps a person describe what they're like when they're well, and then find out what those things that trigger them into really difficult feelings. And then when are things breaking down, and when do I need help, and what's the crisis planning involved, and how do I plan for a crisis or after the crisis has happened? All these things are offered to every single person that walks through our service center doors. But what I implemented about 3 years ago was to offer RAP to all staff. And so far we have done, I think we're on our 15th RAP class for the people that work in our service system, and we've had supervisors and clinicians. We've had office assistant staff come and do wellness recovery action plans. We just frame it around the workplace. All right, so here's the lived experience career ladder in Riverside County. So it starts with volunteerism, and so what I have here is the peer support specialist, family advocate, and parent partner. That's what those little abbreviations are. But you can be a volunteer and work a minimum of 2 hours a week, so you can get the idea of what it's like to be in the clinic as a person who is providing service as opposed to receiving services, just getting your toes wet. And then we have the internship program. The internship program allows a person to work 20 hours a week with a commitment of an actual schedule that they have to keep to empower that individual to understand what it's like to be at work on time and as counted for, because we give them responsibilities in the clinic that they're expected to take care of in the clinic. When we hire somebody full-time, they start at trainee level. The trainee level for each person who works as a peer provider begins with a salary just above $15 American an hour. It's $15.74, I think, is where it is right now. And it's not a living wage, at least not in Orange County, it's not. But it's close, and it's better than most counties in the state of California. It also includes full benefits and representation of a union, a labor union. Every peer support specialist upon hire becomes a member of LIUNA. And then once they pass their probationary period, it's 1 year, and they get reevaluated. They get evaluated in 6 months about how they're doing. And then after that year is over, they're eligible for journey level status, which moves them up to about $18 an hour. We used to have a lot of barriers to this promotional process because supervisors didn't know when it was supposed to happen, and that's kind of where that training kind of goes in for the supervisors about peer support. But from that confusion came a policy that I'm very, very proud of. I wrote the draft policy 164 in Riverside County, and I'll share it with anybody who wants it. It's a policy about how do we recruit, how do we supervise, how do we train, and how do we promote a peer support specialist in our service system. And we have very, very specific guidelines around that in our policies. Once a person has worked as a peer support specialist in our service system successfully and consistently, with good attendance, with professional development that has gone without a hitch, we tend to, even the people who've had challenges have been able to be elevated to the senior peer support position. The senior peer support specialist is a person who is a leader among their peers that they're working with. However, they do not have any hierarchy with the peer support specialists that they support, and I'll discuss that a little further on. And then the last peer position is mine, which is peer policy and planning specialist, which is a program manager position in Riverside County. And each of those program managers self-identify with our own lived experience. Our family advocate, he's a person who self-identifies with a son who has schizophrenia. His wife actually works as a family advocate as well in our service system. She's a senior in our service system. And then our parent partner, she is a parent of a couple of kids who'd gone through the service system as children. So the senior peer support team is a leadership team with lived experience. They're placed regionally or program specific so they can be of service and mentor staff at each of those locations as needed, and their number is given out to each of the peer support specialists that work in their region or in their program. So if something is going wrong, or if somebody's having a particularly difficult day, they reach out to their senior peer support specialist for recovery coaching. They've had a minimum of 2 years of experience as a line staff peer support specialist. Again, I said the mentorship role, they train. They're trainers to the line staff peer support specialists. They partner with the clinic supervisor. They're not a supervisor. The clinic supervises those peer employees. The senior peer is my employee, and they're out there to provide oversight and support and training to the individuals working in the clinics as peer providers. Their role is non-punitive, and they role model to all staff, not just about peer work, but also about how to be self-responsible on the job. And I get more phone calls from other job classes, other disciplines in our service system. They call me and say, you know, your senior really exemplifies what it is to be a public servant. And when I get those calls, I just, I burst into tears because I'm such a baby. I cry about everything. They're the ones who are supposed to perpetuate this recovery environment that we talk about. This is shamelessly stolen from Recovery Innovations. I'm going to give Chris Martin and Lori Ashcraft the credit for this. But what is a recovery environment? It's a hopeful environment. And if you look at these two columns, you see that the non-recovery environment talks about starting with a low expectation of what a person's going to be able to do. Well, you're never going to be a doctor. You never, graduated high school. What do you mean? We just take that out of the entire conversation. The biggest piece of this is the high expectation. If you have high expectations for people in general, everything else falls into place. Hope, compassion, empowerment, and care, it all comes to the forefront if you have high expectations for any person that you meet. So what is the senior peer support specialist role with the peer support specialist line staff member? They're a coach. They're a recovery coach. They're also a professional coach. They're a person who will maybe role model what time management might look like. I even have senior peers who struggle with time management, so they lean on each other to kind of get better practices together. They reorient the peer to the practice of peer support because we often train the peer right out of the peer support specialist, which I'll talk about a little later. They role model, as I said, and they hold the hope. Their functions, they attend and participate in staff meetings. They're actually required to be at supervisors' meetings. They have to be at the table because they bring the peer's perspective, the consumer perspective, to the table when decisions are being made. They inform our system. They provide moral support to staff under disciplinary review. They provide training to all staff, and they interview potential peer support specialists. The recruitment process is really, I hand that to line staff peer support specialists, gets handed to the senior peers in partnership with their supervisors that are going to take these employees on. So peer support is a practice. We've got to be certified. 72-hour courses are required in our service system. And as I said, they're not just a warm body, and they require that we follow federal guidelines for what that peer practice is. I think that the role itself, it warrants inclusion, it warrants respect. I often tell peer support specialists that you have a choice of being a part of the watercolor picture or part of the puzzle. A puzzle has pieces, and each piece fits in, and it creates a whole picture of what that treatment is supposed to be, and that person is right at the center of that picture. But if you're part of the watercolor, you're watered down and you're blending in, and your language becomes something that's not peer-oriented and not recovery-focused. So what I want to challenge peer providers with is to stay part of that puzzle, be part of that treatment team, become included in that service provision team. Because you know what? As Elphaba says in Wicked, everyone deserves a chance to fly. Thank you.